property rights are a sticky one because there are some people around who appear to have way too much property. And we know that Canada functions as a collective. We have to cooperate with each other to get highways built and schools built and all of that. The money has to come from somewhere. It should come from all of us, actually. So taxation is obviously necessary. But something about taxation that should be admitted right up front is that it sacrifices the individual right to property. Why would anybody give up their property to someone who told them that they had to pay up? That's a horrible thing. I get the feeling that sometimes people just don't go back to basics. Like, there's this idea that you can't discriminate when you hire. But of course, they discriminate against white males all the time. But you're not supposed to discriminate against people of color or women. Okay, so I don't think you should be able to discriminate on those bases either. But it violates the employer's right to essentially just hire whoever he or she wants. I would prefer that people who own companies can hire whoever they want. Because if you tell them that they have to hire a certain kind of person, you've taken away their freedom. Democracy is about maintaining individual freedom. So I've actually written down a bit here, so maybe I'll just read a bit. I think I talked about this last time, but a democratic vote can result in an authoritarian state, as happened in Canada. And it happens through ideological indoctrination, bribery, and fear. They want the kids in universal daycare to help the economy and to help mostly women in very difficult situations. But they also want them in daycare so that they can start pumping their brains full of social justice values. Social justice sounds fine. But in reality, it's really destructive. And bribery. I think that we should just say this, okay? If Trudeau or Jagmeet come out and promote the hiring of any identity group, then that identity group is going to vote for that person. At least you would expect that identity group to vote for that person so that they can gain benefits. They can get a job more easily, so that they can get into school more easily. He's bribing them. It's a bribe. And so it's ideological indoctrination, bribery, and fear. You can't cross these people. Look it up. Cancel culture. This has been obvious for years that the left uses intimidation. Should probably be noted that epidemics are an opportunity for governments because to establish authoritarian rule, because people are willing to give up freedom for security. And they should. That's necessary. But the problem is it does give that power to the governments, and once they have it, they're not going to want to give it up very easily. People like power. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like, we've just been through enough history, we know enough that this tendency is very real. Give them a chance to take power over where you go, if you can go to school, if you can go to a restaurant, if you can keep your business open, and they'll abuse it. And people will go along with it because they want the security. And especially if they can have the security and also a lot of wealth. What they did was they borrowed too much money. It's going to cause enormous inflation. It already has. So the people at lower income people have even less chance of buying a house ever. Um, but a lot of other people, like government employees, I don't think that there's any level of government, municipal, provincial, or federal, they lost a check. I think they got paid the whole time. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was liberal buddies that they sent out a lot of checks to businesses and to just regular employees. So you could stay home and collect a check. And why would you be angry with the government that did that? You might resent what they're doing to the country, but it's nice to get a check, right? It's bribery. I think it should always be remembered that democratic institutions and principles are the product of at least 2,500 years of thought, struggle, and sacrifice, and by people who knew perfectly well the horror of authoritarian rule. They know what it's like to have a king that you didn't elect, and that's not accountable to you. Authoritarian rule is what societies will revert to if these institutions aren't maintained. And we're doing pretty well in Canada financially. But you sort of wonder, how long that will last. How much into the future they'll be willing to spread the wealth. There won't be as much wealth, most likely. They can't continue to borrow forever, I don't think. The interest rate is low. We have to give them that. I think they locked in certain loans like at 1% or something for 30 years. Almost dumb not to borrow money for that. But the money should go into making Canada a more competitive country with the infrastructure and for training for people who are going to enter a very competitive job market. That's where the money should have gone. And I'm sure that a lot of it, in fact, didn't. I'm sure that a lot of it went to institutions that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's the thing, right? Democracy isn't the dominant value in Canada anymore. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is. And all of those are discriminatory. You can see what an authoritarian society is like if you look at China, Russia, North Korea, Venezuela, or Cuba. There's a lot of other countries that have suffered as well. They have suffered and that continue to suffer. Okay, so I'm reading aloud here, and the next paragraph I have is, of course it's necessary to both cooperate with collectives and to take collective responsibility. As a country, Canada has to take responsibility for what happened to the children in the residential schools. Whether it be an apology or financial compensation, that has to happen. But will we ever get to a point where we've apologized enough? They found the unmarked graves in various residential schools. They found them. They already knew they were there. They found them. And a lot of those kids died when there was tuberculosis. They died during the Depression, during the First World War, the Second World War. Those were not easy times. Which isn't to make an excuse exactly. But it does explain. Is an explanation an excuse? It's not when you're trying to apologize. It's not when you're trying to ask forgiveness. Asking forgiveness means admitting what you did and agreeing not to do it again. I think Canada has admitted what it did, and I don't think Canada's going to do it again. We deserve, as a collective, we deserve forgiveness. We have to move on. This is a waste of time. I know it's the collective religion in Canada now, but it's not going anywhere good. I mean, and so much of it is just talk. Trudeau could have spent more money getting rid of the boil water advisors, I think. He says he doesn't have the money. I think he actually said he didn't have the money. He's got money for a lot of other things. I think that's the first thing he should have done when he was brought into power in 2016. I don't think that First Nations are getting their fair share of education money either. In my opinion, he should have taken care of that immediately. Maybe those are outstanding issues too. But this derangement that's been going on, especially the last half year, is so pointless. I like the expression, no good deed goes unpunished. The more you give the activists, the more that they'll want. So let's say that there was a certain time in Canadian history when women were treated badly. So we eliminated the systems that treated them badly. So women do very much well. So as they're doing better and obtaining more power in society, are they then going to say, okay, that's good, we've achieved parity? Or will they push through? You've rewarded them already for making the complaint. You paid them. They've developed feminist studies programs and all the rest of that in order to keep arguing that they're being suppressed. Keep demanding money. And that's been settled quite a while ago as well. The one really legitimate complaint that women have is that the raising children, having babies, raising children, does take them out of the workforce. That's an issue. But that's not bad treatment. That's a disadvantage. You can't expect an employer to look at a 22-year-old woman who's married and healthy and give him a job and expect her to be around. Maybe she will, maybe she won't, but there's a good chance she's going to take time off to have kids. So why does the employer have to pay that? So first, they force him to hire women, and then they force him to pay maternity leave. That's asking a lot. Imagine the person that says, no, this is not good for my company. I might lose my company if I lose money like this. So you have to hire that person. And then when they get pregnant, you have to pay them to stay home. I don't know what to do about that. Women are definitely disadvantaged that way. And I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. Okay, next paragraph. By definition, collectivists are willing to sacrifice the individual. But what actually happens is that the individuals are sacrificed to the greed and ambition of collectivist leaders, not so much to other people in the society. I think there's probably a lot of evidence of that. Look at the Bolshevik Revolution, for example. In a decent and free society, individuals will often sacrifice their time, energy, and even their lives because it gives them, and this brings us back to the beginning, a sense of belonging, identity, and meaning. In an authoritarian state, people are forced to sacrifice. That's the big difference. It's the difference between charity and welfare. Charity's not going to go far enough in a lot of instances. That's true. People will need to be taxed. But you lose a lot when you start forcing people to give up money to help others. When Trudeau decided to place responsibility for refugees with the government more, and not so much the charitable institutions, usually a church, he forced taxpayers to pay rather than let people who were already willing to pay. It cost the refugees, because the refugees didn't have a community to come into. At some point, if you're hurting the people that you claim to be helping, you've got to rethink. Slaughtering Latin American people, they're getting pushed across the border to commit crimes that go into lives of prostitution. Black Lives Matter is killing black people all over the place.